Hello, welcome to a new edition of the Right Wing Populist Podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So today we're going to talk about Nick Fuentes, folks. He had some controversial things to say about Venezuela, what happened with Nicolas Maduro, the president, or should I say the former president of Venezuela. He got kidnapped by the United States military and got arraigned, I believe, in New York. He's going to face all these ridiculous charges. We kidnapped a head of state and we gave all these ridiculous pretexts. We said that there was like this drug gang that doesn't even really exist. The whole thing was sort of a shit show in the sense that we never gave a consistent rationale for why we were kidnapping and taking out Maduro. That's partly because of legal rationales. This raid, this kidnapping probably wasn't legal. It's less illegal if we frame it as not a war, if we frame it as more of a drug situation, but the reality is this was never about drugs. This was about other things. And Nick Fuentes had some things to say as he posted on Twitter, and I think he posted on Telegram, whatever other social media he uses. It kind of created a stir because he was saying things that I think a lot of his fans weren't aware of the type of stuff he supports. And we're going to get into it all, but before we do, I need you to do something for me, folks. I need you to do something for me. Please subscribe, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever the hell you listen to your podcast, it's available. Please subscribe. And if you are listening on YouTube, also like and comment. Helps with the algorithm, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. I don't want to have to drop the OnlyFans link in my bio, folks. I don't want to do it. I don't want to objectify myself. I'm sure many of you people would enjoy it if I did, but I'm not going to do it. And help me not do it. Please subscribe to the podcast. In all seriousness, the views and the listenership has been great the last month or two, so keep up the support. And again, I really do appreciate it. So yes, Nicolas Fuentes had some things to say about what happened between the United States and Venezuela. When the kidnapping, and I'm going to call it kidnapping because that's what it was, when Nicolas Maduro was kidnapped by the United States military, Fuentes immediately, I think, posted on X, like a USA thing with like the flag, naming support for the raid, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. And then he sort of qualified it a bit. He sent a second tweet basically saying that, I'm not so sure about having to run Venezuela. This make it a little bit rocky. But then he posted more stuff on Telegram that became much more controversial. For instance, he said this on X. He said, your oil, our choice, forever. That was sort of a play on words on his sort of controversial statements about abortion when Trump was reelected, which is kind of funny, but kind of lame at the same time. It's not that funny, but, it's Nick Fuentes. What can you say? But then he started saying stuff like, taking our own side means calling out Jewish oligarchs and anti-American peasants from third world shitholes. We are America, second to none, and we own the finish line. And then he said, I have literally never said no more foreign conflicts. I support U.S. empire. I support the Monroe Doctrine. I support hemispheric defense. I always have. And then he was getting really defensive because he was getting more thumbs downs than thumbs up on Telegram. He also said this. I don't know. I just thought we were all on the same page. I cheered for Russia's invasion of Ukraine because that is a legitimate defense of Russian interest in its contested sphere of influence. I feel similarly about Venezuela. And like I said, he's been getting ratioed on some of these comments. And so a couple of things. First off, he compares this to Russia, Ukraine, and his point is, well, I was supportive nominally of what Russia was doing in Ukraine, so me being supportive of the United States taking out Maduro is me being consistent. And it's like, well, a couple things, Nick. First off, the situations are not comparable. Okay, you were having Western meddling in Ukraine at the expense of Russia for years. I mean, you had a pro-Western coup, which was really an anti-Russian coup, of the president of Ukraine in 2014, the Maidan coup. And that was an act of hostility toward Russia because the government Ukraine had elected was neutral, if anything, much more pro-Russia, wanted to have good relations with Russia. And because of that, the West took him out. So if you're Russia and you have the United States and the West meddling in elections in Ukraine, that's That's a little bit different than what's happening in Venezuela. As far as we know, Russia or China did not meddle in the elections of Nicolas Maduro. He might have not won those elections, but there's no evidence foreign countries were meddling in them. If anything, the United States probably meddled in the elections against him, but whatever. I'm not saying Nicolas Maduro actually won. My point is, though, the circumstances are very different. Also, Venezuela was not about to join a security pact with Russia or China. Ukraine was effectively becoming a member of NATO, and at the very least, they were on track to become a member of NATO very soon. And you want to remember, folks, the whole point of NATO was to combat Soviet influence. Even when Russia, now granted, when the Soviet Union fell and Russia was trying to rebuild itself, NATO became more of a way to pacify Europe, to try to make sure that there was no more intra-Europe conflicts, European conflicts. But once Russia became a great power again, thanks to Putin's tremendous leadership from the Russian perspective, yeah, part of NATO is now to combat Russian influence. And, if you're Russia, that's an act of aggression from the West. And really, NATO is the United States. So it's really the United States trying to get in Russia's influence in the region. There's no question about it. Okay, Venezuela is not a great power. They were not about to join a security pact with Russia or China. The situations are not comparable. And again, you want to remember that we're Americans. We're not Russians. And I think Nick is correct in the sense that I think Russia's war is arguably justified in the sense that I think they were provoked by NATO expansion. I think that's true. But that doesn't mean the war is actually beneficial for Russia. The war might not be beneficial for Russia. It's very possible if you're a Russian citizen, you may have good reasons not to support Russia invading Ukraine. It might not be good for Russia long term. So even if you think, in this instance, the United States was justified in taking out Maduro because of influence, let's say, that doesn't mean that it's actually going to benefit the United States long term. Because if you look at the history of regime change, it often backfires. At the very least, in the country that you're doing the regime change in, and usually politically backfires at the very least for the party in power that's doing the regime change. Just look at the W. Bush administration. Look at Obama after he did regime change in Libya, taking out Gaddafi. That was a disaster. That country's still in a civil war. Helped prop up ISIS. It was just terrible. So oftentimes these regime change conflicts don't work out for the country, even if it's arguably justified. And while Russia would like to see Ukraine hold elections and get rid of Zelensky, they haven't. This isn't about regime change fundamentally in Ukraine. It's about creating a buffer zone away from NATO to try to combat or create distance from Western influence. And again, we're Americans. We need to care about what's good for America. We can analyze whether or not you could justify these actions against Nicolas Maduro from let's say from the standpoint of the Monroe Doctrine or from just an imperialist point of view. But that's fine because you have to look at it from the American perspective. We're Americans. We're not Russians. So even if it's justified morally or ethically or from whatever point of view you come from, you have to ask yourself, is this actually good domestically for the United States going forward? And I think it's clearly not. I mean, and to be fair to Nick, he also questioned a little bit the idea of rebuilding Venezuela, so I understand that. But, if we're going to, first off, it's not going to be that easy just to take their oil. It's not clear based off the reports that the oil is that accessible or that they have as much oil as the Maduro government was claiming. So at the very least, it's going to take a lot of time to get that beautiful, juicy oil out of the ground. So we're going to have to rebuild Venezuela with taxpayer money. We may get paid back in 5 to 10 years, maybe, but there's no guarantee of that. Many people that are still friendly to the Maduro regime are still in power, including his vice president. That probably means we're going to have more troops on the ground. I mean, this whole thing could be a shit show very quickly. And it looks terrible for the administration. And Nick's like, oh, it's our oil, your oil, our choice. It's like, okay, Nick. Really? Because that worked out so great in the Middle East when we got oil from all these different countries. And I know Trump likes to say we didn't keep the oil. Well, we actually did keep some of the oil. I mean, let's be honest. And also, that's not a good reason. I'm sorry. That's not a good reason to invade a country and do regime changes for oil. And again, it's not like Russia or China was about to put Venezuela in some ridiculous security pact like NATO. That wasn't happening. Was China and Venezuela benefiting from a relationship together? Yes. Was Russia supplying Venezuela with weapons? Let's say yes. But that's very different than having them join a security pact. That's very different, folks. You have to understand this. And frankly, there's a good argument that the whole point of the Monroe Doctrine is to be against regime change. I believe the Secretary of State of President Monroe explicitly said that we're against regime change. The Monroe Doctrine is not about regime change. So I just think you want to be careful about this. And the reason why many of his supporters, Nick Fuentes supporters, were surprised by his comments is, Fuentes has been a little bit dishonest. He's been very critical of these forever wars. He's been very critical of the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, all these ridiculous regime change wars. And, what we did here in Venezuela was regime change. Now, is it true that Fuentes has made other comments suggesting that he's okay with an expansionist foreign policy if it means we dominate the Western Hemisphere and we get natural resources and, we become an empire? Yeah, he's made comments like that, but he's been a little bit contradictory. Because if you're going to criticize regime change wars but still be in favor of empire, well, one of the ways you become a dominant empire, you dominate a hemisphere, is through regime change. Can you do it through soft power? Yes, but even with soft power, there has to be sort of an implicit threat of violence. You can't have that without having an imperialist army, which the United States obviously has. So, Fuente, he's just wrong. It's not good for the United States. It's just not. The United States almost never benefits when we get involved in other countries' affairs. Again, look at Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Look at Vietnam. Look at all these catastrophes. This is ridiculous. And it's like, oh, we're going to take their oil. It's like, okay, well, not clear how much oil they actually have. Not clear if we're going to be able to get it quickly. Looks like we're not going to be able to get it quickly to the extent they have any fucking oil. This is not good. Look, we'll see what happens. And if we had just taken out Maduro, then I would maybe be more on Fuentes' side. But we're committing to rebuild Venezuela. Trump said we're going to make Venezuela great again. It's like, what the fuck? Nick is America first. But we're going to take the oil. We're going to have to rebuild Venezuela. Even though, again, to be fair to Nick, he's not as confident, or I'm not sure he's all in on the idea of rebuilding Venezuela. And I want to be fair to Nick. But you can't really take the oil without doing regime change and rebuild. That's the thing. It's not really realistic, Nick. You gotta. And Nick's a smart guy. He understands. As if I can understand it, he certainly can. Much smarter than me. Got to give him his due. I'm not glazing him. I'm just being objective, folks. You can't say I'm not objective. But this, again, it's why his fans are so critical of him, because they actually do want, most of his supporters actually are America first, and they don't see how rebuilding Venezuela is America first. They view that as America last. So, I don't know. It's kind of telling that this is one of the few times, at least on Telegram, I don't think on X, but on Telegram, we're seeing Fuentes be ratioed. He's almost never ratioed by his fans and supporters. It's you just don't see that, and that shows you, in all fairness to Nick, that he really has built an audience of people that really do support America first. Now, one caveat to all this, I have seen people suggest that all of a sudden Nick Fuentes is like a Zionist cuck, because I guess there are some Zionists or big donors that are supportive of Israel that have also been supportive of these Venezuelan strikes. And I guess Maduro has been critical of Zionists. I want to be very clear about this. There is no evidence that we took out Nicolas Maduro to somehow benefit Israel, or like at the behest that big pro-Israel donors or Jewish donors, all those ridiculous conspiracy theories. There's no evidence of that. In my opinion, and again, the administration's been inconsistent about their rationale, but I think partly because of legal reasons, I think. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to get into that, but there are legal reasons why they're being a little bit obscure about what their exact motivation is. But I think the real reason is fundamentally Marco Rubio is unfortunately the Secretary of State. He belongs as more like the Secretary of State at, he should be like the Secretary at a gay bathhouse, not the Secretary of State, but I'm not going to I've given that rant before. Let's not get into that, those big ass ears of his. Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State, unfortunately. And because his parents are from Cuba, he's obsessed with getting regime change done in South America. That whole area, Colombia, Cuba. And he views Venezuela as the first step to getting all these regime changes done in these countries. And he's always been a neocon. Rewatch some of those 2016 debates between him and Trump. He was very critical of Trump because Trump was against regime change and he was for regime change in those debates. And unfortunately, I think Rubio was able to convince Trump, at least in part, that drugs were a big problem coming from Venezuela. And an anti-drug argument is an argument that Trump's going to be really receptive to. And I think that's why Trump gave Rubio the green light to go after Nicolas Maduro. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Fuentes. To be fair to him, he has said before in the past that he's okay with a hawkish foreign policy if it's actually in America's interest. But what we did in Venezuela is not in America's interest. I think it'll show in the future. I think it'll prove to be a mistake. Probably one of Trump's biggest mistakes of his second term. Probably of his both terms. But hope for the best. We'll see what happens. Anyway, folks, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Again, please subscribe, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Greatly appreciate it. Also, again, like and comment if you are listening on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow, folks. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and day, and I love you all. Bye-bye.